Welcome to the JOANNA WHALEY podcast. We are in the middle of Pride Month, and there's a few things that you need to know before we begin today. If you could rate, comment, share, subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, that would be a huge help. And if you're an LGBTQ person who needs spiritual support, you need someone to listen to you and walk with you through this wild journey of being queer and trying to figure out your spirituality, you can join me at Patreon. That's patreon.com/JOANNA WHALEY. Once again, it's patreon.com/JOANNA WHALEY. There's a whole bunch of people who identify as queer who are also building spiritual community there. You can join for as little as $1.99 a month. And we are in the middle of Pride Month, and today we're going to have a really fun conversation. Stick with us on the other side of the music, and we are going to have an awesome, awesome time today. Happy Pride. Here we go. Can't get it out of my head. Can't get it out of my head. I will never be straight, but you say I'll be great if it's out of my head. Well, hello, friends. Welcome to Pride 2024. So happy that you are here for another episode of our podcast today. And this is fun. If you have just joined this podcast recently, first of all, I just want to say thank you. In the last month of this podcast, there have been about, I would say it's been close to 4,000 of you listening each and every week. I mean, this is blowing my mind. I only started this podcast a few months ago, and I'm just blown away constantly by those of you who have been listening to this show. And we've got a lot of new features happening on the show today. If you are someone who's on TikTok, you can actually watch every week when I record this podcast. You can watch it happen live. If you go to TikTok and you look up JOANNA WHALEY Music, you can actually watch as I record the podcast live. And also, I will admit people to chat with me one-on-one during the podcast recording. And normally I have like this longer section, about 30 minutes, where I just talk. But if at any point you feel you want to interact with me live on the show, you can do it. Just hit the guest button at JOANNA WHALEY Music on TikTok, and I would love to join you. If you're listening to this on other channels, which there's so many of you listening on other channels, and you want me to answer questions that you have live on my show, you can go to joannawhaley.com/live, and you can text or you can leave a voicemail for me, and I would be happy to answer those live on the podcast. This week we had tons. I was shocked, and I think it's because of so many of you have been listening. There was tons of you that text in questions this week, and some of them were intense, and I'm going to read some of those here on the show near the end of today. But before we get started, I want to bring you back to when I worked at a cool megachurch. Again, if you're new to my show, I was a megachurch pastor for 20 years of my life. And this was right out of high school. So I got out of high school and I graduated. And right then, days later, my pastors were like, good luck, you're a pastor, here's a paycheck. We'll pay you $5 an hour, So, but that was crazy money to me then. So of course I took the job, and here I am. I'm a music minister. I'm also pastoring young people. And we had this youth group that I was so into. And here's the crazy thing. Our youth group. Now, sometimes you might be thinking youth group, oh, cool, maybe 20 kids in a church basement and a pool table. No. This youth ministry that I worked in had probably 500 to 600 teenagers each and every week. It was wild. And at times our youth group was bigger than our Sunday morning church attendance. It was wild. I mean, there was points where you would walk into the auditorium, or you would call it the sanctuary of our church, and there would just be so many, it'd be wall to wall teenagers. And so I found myself working in this youth group at the age of 18, not having a freaking clue what I was doing, how to be a pastor. And now all of a sudden I am entrusted with pastoring all of these people in my church. And so this was a huge responsibility. And one of the things I remember about our church when I worked there was it was one of the most passionate environments I'd ever been to. I don't know if you've been to like a big concert or if you've ever been to like one of these big worship bands where they're like real wild and like lots of lights and really loud sound systems. That was our church each and every week. It was just like that. It was like concert level loud. We had lights and smoke machines and lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, that was our church. That was us every single week. And for us, it was really this wild experience to be a part of. And there was particularly a lot of young leaders being raised up in our church, a lot of young, talented young people that our church was raising up. And there's times where I can be critical of my church. There's times where I can be really critical of the things I went through. I went through conversion therapy in this church 3 times. I went through some terrible things. And no, it's not Stockholm syndrome. I'm not like thinking that I think that my captors were like, a good thing for me. But what I'm saying is in this environment, there was actually a lot of really interesting, cool things that I had never seen in any church before. We were raising up young people and leaders who are passionate, who are energetic, who are excited about life and helping others have a better life. And one of these leaders in particular, his name was Ian. And I've talked to Ian this week, and Ian's, and I asked permission to tell this story. But I remember Ian, and Ian was one of these passionate, like, worshipers. He was really passionate young Christian kids. And Ian was like one of the kids in the front row every week, like screaming out the worship songs at the top of his lungs, just like going crazy. And he was a really inspiring upcoming leader. And I remember like watching Ian flourish in our church and grow into this awesome, passionate leader in our church. And he was young. And then he graduated high school. He graduated from high school, went off to college, and went off to school where I went. And I went to Eastern Michigan University. Go Eagles. That's where I went. And yeah, it's right down the street from U of M. Okay, so we kind of sometimes felt like, the little sister down the road that didn't feel as cool, But there he was at Eastern Michigan University. And I had heard through the grapevine after Ian left our youth group that he came out as gay. And I remember, and keep in mind, I was in conversion therapy at this time in my life. I was afraid that people were going to find out my stuff. I was afraid that people were going to find out that I was wrestling with my gender on the inside. So I began to double down on some of my church's super homophobic, transphobic policies because it kept me safe. And I've had to own some of the struggles of having to deal with that, right? But this time in particular, I was really close to Ian. And then when I heard Ian had gone off to college and came out as gay, honestly, I was afraid. And I began to hear some of the other pastors in our church began to have conversations about what a train wreck it was, what a disaster it was that Ian had come out as gay. And through these conversations, it started to become clear that my pastors wanted me to confront Ian about his homosexuality. So here I am in the closet, and it's now my responsibility to go confront this kid from our youth group about his gayness. Are you serious? That was what I was charged with from my pastors. So I got in my car. I texted Ian and said, hey, would you like to meet up for coffee? We haven't seen each other in a while. And me having been at campus, I could make up an excuse to be there. So I said, hey, I'm going to be on campus. Would you like to have some coffee? So I make the 35-minute drive out to, out to Ypsilanti, Michigan. And I remembered feeling the fear come inside of me. And so I get to campus, I park in the lot, I get out and I walk to the student center, and I get a text from Ian. It says, hey, I'm at the park. Sorry, I can't make it to the student center. Do you want to meet me at the park? So I go to the park, University Park. There's like a fountain. It's really pretty. And we're sitting there at like the picnic tables outside, and in typical pastor fashion, I just was shooting the breeze for like 30 minutes with Ian, just talking and talking and talking. Oh, everything's great. Things are great. We miss you at church. Just kind of avoiding the topic. And then at the very end of the conversation, I remember just dropping it on him, saying, Ian, I heard that that you recently came out as gay. And the tone of our conversation totally changed. I remember after I said, Ian, I heard that you came out as a gay man. The next words out of my mouth, I really regret. I remember saying to Ian that according to the Bible, this wasn't okay. I remember saying that to him. And in an instant, I watched my friend completely shut down. I watched his eyes glaze over. I watched him go from leaning forward to sitting back in the chair. And I just remember in that moment watching all of my credibility as this person's friend fade in one moment. And he ended the conversation really abruptly and, said he had to get to class. And I just got back in my car and I went back. And I know that in that moment, I totally devastated my friend. I completely devastated my friend in that moment as his friend and as his pastor. I just totally missed it. I missed the mark with this guy. And it's one of those moments in life and in my work and in my work with people that I regret the most. There's been moments where I've had to reconcile with these things, right? And I know that there's people all over the world and all over who have been harmed by pastors in the same exact way. Where a pastor filled you and love bombed on you, and then all of a sudden they pull the rug out from under you and tell you that who you are and who you love is going to send you to hell. Like this whole time they knew what they were going to say to you. And it's like they were holding it back for the moment. That's what I did as a pastor. That's what many pastors do to people all the time. So today, I wanted to start off with this story because it can sometimes feel really, really defeating to be a queer person in faith, because you have stories of pastors that were like myself, who came after you and told you who you are and where you're going when you die. And And I have just, today what I want to do, I want to look at where we've been. And today I really want to focus in on lesbian and gay people in regards to how religion in America and how religion in our world has treated the gay community. And now I'm a trans woman, and so like, you know, I'm trans, I'm bisexual. I do not like, I'm not a gay person, you know, I'm not a lesbian. I'm not, you know, and many people, like I see sometimes in the chat, if you go to TikTok and you go to JOANNA WHALEY Music, there's a lot of people that like to call me a man in the comments, but I'm not a gay man. I'm not a lesbian, you know. So I'm going to speak to this from more of a historical avenue today and kind of show you where we've been, but also at the end, I kind of want to bring us to like some hope of where religion can go and where religion will go and has been going in regards to the gay community. And here's what I want you to hear. Despite the crazy stuff you hear online, there is progress being made in the gay community for spirituality. There is, but we have had a dark history, and people have been repeating some of that history. I mean, some of the first writings of lesbians in the world, you know, came from like right around 1650 or some of the like the earlier writings we find when Anglo-Welsh poet named Catherine Phillips wrote a poem called The English Sappho, which celebrated female love and friendship. But the church wanted to stamp this out of print. So the Library of Alexandria in Egypt was believed to have had volumes of poets who discussed lesbian love. They discussed women who loved each other romantically. And the Christian church in 48 BCE was written as to have been destroying all of these writings, which is why one of the earliest ones we find is in the 14 to 1500s of lesbians in culture, because the church had done everything they can to stamp out these ideas and these writings. You see, if we're looking specifically at lesbians right now, like the term originated from this word called Lesbos, which was an island close to the west coast of present-day Turkey. It was this adjective used to describe the inhabitants of the island, and the word's origin is in the description of its description of sexuality was complicated. It's an ancient verb, a lesbian, which meant to defile or to act like a woman of Lesbos. Okay, so it was kind of a derogatory term in the beginning. And what we see is that term, and you see a lot of terms in the queer community, you know, rise, and you see them start to gain, you know, they'll be derogatory, and then they'll be redeemed, like the word queer. For a long time, the word queer was considered derogatory, and it has been reclaimed. The word lesbian, to describe two women who love each other, was a redeemed term. Now, Rome actually has some documented writings of women who engaged in relationships with one another. The Roman word for woman who enjoyed relations with another one was tribas, which meant to rub something. Okay, so yeah, getting a little graphic here. We'll make sure that E explicit is on the podcast today. But this is where archaeologists found evidence of lesbian relationships. They found evidence that the existence of lesbians date back to the Greco-Roman world. In fact, it's not just a Roman idea either. Now, if you're familiar with Hindu ancient texts, there is a very famous one that many people know about. It's called the Kama Sutra. Okay? The Kama Sutra actually details same-sex activity between women as a sacred and a beautiful art form. This is the Kama Sutra. A Hindu text is actually showing us this. Now, The next thing is like, what we need to understand is that the Greco-Roman world, with some of these ideas, began to destigmatize being a lesbian. In the 16th century Greco-Roman world, like, it was discovered and gave accounts of women who were in relationships with one another. And at the time of this Renaissance, there began to be separate feelings, and there used to be more of a lifting up of lesbian relationships. Now, if you look to like 1451, now let's talk about gay men. Okay, let's talk about gay men for a minute. The Inquisition, okay, 1451, Pope Nicholas V, he called for the murder of sodomites and the torture of gay men. Think about that for a minute. The leader of the Christian church at the time had sanctioned the murder of gay men. This sounds a little familiar. In 1933, there was this political regime in Germany who sent gay men to their death. This was the backdrop. And like, even looking in like the 1780s, Britain enforced these rules on other nations that they had conquered, making it illegal, making it a capital offense to be gay. And in Australia, you could get up to 10 years in prison for being gay. 10 years in prison for being gay. Even in the 1840s, like, British settlers came, they annexed New Zealand, and there was this indigenous tribe there called the Maori people, okay? And this indigenous culture was very open about the concept of queerness, about the concept of being gay or being a lesbian. But when Britain came in with their religious rule, they stamped it out. They put an end to it, making it illegal to be queer. This isn't just an American thing of trying to stamp out queerness, trying to stamp out gay people. This had been going on in India, the country of India. It wasn't until 2009 that India made it legal to be gay in their country, literally to just be gay. You couldn't be gay there. You could also get 10 years in prison if you were gay in India. But look, this is where we've been, and a little bit later in the show, I'm going to take questions, and I'll have chats with people right here on the podcast. You can go to TikTok and go to JOANNA WHALEY Music, and I'll be taking questions in just a moment. But I want us to hear that there has actually, despite this dark history we've had in our world of trying to stamp out gay people and lesbians, there is some progress happening in spirituality, in religion. And I know that religion doesn't work for all queer people, but you're listening to my podcast. This is a queer spiritual podcast, right? So if you're here, you're somewhat interested in hearing about this. But in 2003, the Episcopal Church of the United States ordained its first openly gay bishop, named Gene Robinson. Like, the church is beginning to bring in queer and gay and lesbian clergy. I know so many gay and lesbian clergy, some who have really worked and made a huge impact in my life and in others. The church for so long has prided itself on being countercultural, right? On being countercultural. Indigenous or religious institutions have often seen themselves that way. And the New York Times in 2014 said in an article that it found that American congregations are becoming more open to gay and lesbian clergy. Now that was 2014. Now, if you watch the news today, it seems hard to believe that. But if you do look, there are more congregations now in America than ever before who are ordaining and accepting gay clergy. You know, we have to think now. And what I love is we went through some of the dark history of where we've been and how we've treated gay people and lesbians. But what I love is that we have a movement today, even in the religious space, that says we have to have justice for queer people. Justice for queer people in our world is increasing. In fact, there's even theology. And that's what this podcast is based off of, queer theology. Dating back to the 1700s, Frederick Scheinrelberg, didn't say that one right, built a philosophical principle that paved the way for individualizing theology. And these three major movements that came out of this 1700s theology was liberation theology, feminist theology, and queer liberation theology. And it's a beautiful thing when our faith and our queerness can work together instead of opposed to one another. If we learned anything from the Stonewall protest, it was that pride events have popped up all over the world as protests. Pride events are protests. They are nothing more than that. We hear all the time from people who say, pride comes before a fall, right? We'll use that scripture. You can't be proud, while those same people will post memes of, I'm proud to be an American. Well, I'll say to you, friends, you can be proud of that, and we can be proud of who we are, right? We can be proud of who we are just as much as you can be proud of where you live. It's the same thing. We don't look at somebody who celebrates being proud to be an American and tell them that they're living in sin because they're proud. That is what we are saying in pride. We're saying, look, the world has tried to stamp us out for generations and generations. But we're just saying we're proud to be ourselves, and you can't stamp us out. The beautiful thing is that story I told us all at the beginning of the chat, right? Or the beginning of the podcast. I just a few months ago, well, actually about a year ago, I reached back out to Ian. And Ian agreed to have coffee with me again at our college. And this time, I showed up as myself. I showed up as Joanna. And him and I had this beautiful conversation and this moment of asking Ian's forgiveness for me being such a homophobic pastor when I was younger. And I just remember the feeling of joy of having been given the forgiveness of my friend after telling him that who he loved was going to send him to hell. I just couldn't do that. I just couldn't do that anymore. And it was a beautiful moment of forgiveness. You know, we are going to continue this podcast here in a few moments. And when we come back on the other side of the music, I'm going to be taking questions live on the show. We have text questions coming in. So if you are someone who's following along on TikTok, you can go and hit the button to join the conversation. I would love to have you part of the conversation. We can chat one-on-one with one another. So you can do that if you're a listener of the podcast and you're not watching live. You can always go to JOANNAWHALEY.com/live, and you can always text in or leave a voicemail. And we would love, I would love to take your questions, have conversations, even if they're difficult conversations. I would be so happy to do that. When we come back on the other side of the music, just get ready. We're going to have some fun together. I've got some really intense questions coming up on the other side of the music. Some people asked some really difficult questions this week, and I am really looking forward to taking those questions. We'll be back right on the other side of this music. Once again, if you're on TikTok Live, go ahead and ask to join the conversation. If you're not, go to JOANNAWHALEY.com/live, and we will get your questions here on the air. We'll be right back after this. To make me wear the proper clothes, I was deep down dark, felt like heaven froze, 'cause in the mirror I hate it all that I could see. Can't get it out of my head. Can't get it out of my head. I will never be straight, but you say I'll be great if it's out of my head. Hey listeners, happy Pride Month. If you are a queer person and you this Pride Month are looking for a community of people to do life with and to grow spiritually with, even if that seems like something you've never been able to do before, you can do that right now. If you go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley, you can join a whole group of LGBTQ people and allies who are trying to navigate this spiritual journey in step with their queerness. So do yourself a favor this Pride Month and go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. You can join for as little as $1.99 a month, all the way up to $9.99 a month, and join a community and have one-on-one conversations with me all the time. Happy Pride Month. We would love to see you in our community. Patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. Are you awake, or sleeper? Call. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Oh, what a fun conversation we've been having today. And it looks like we have some folks who are joining the conversation. And it looks like, let's see, who do I have here? It looks like Sam. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful story of reconciliation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was... It was a beautiful moment, and I was afraid. I had different feelings about that, but yeah, Ian's become a really good friend of mine after that difficult time, for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. It just made me think of, because I'm also a conversion therapy survivor, and it just made me wonder, what would it be like if the very people who made me hate myself and try to do all those things to change and nothing was working, and then I was hating myself more. What would it be like if those people came into my life again and said, you know what, I was wrong and you're beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving that healing vicariously to me too.
Yeah, of course. And that's the thing. I think one of the things that I've learned the most in my walk, in my spiritual journey, is learning when I was wrong and being willing to say, hey, I've learned something here, and I'm okay with telling somebody who I've harmed with my theology. I'm okay with that. And I think that's where we really need to see the spiritual community go, is to be able to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong about that 5 years ago. But what we have right now is we have this digging, like changing our mind has somehow become wrong, has somehow become the wrong thing to do. And so, yeah, I think that's really my biggest challenge to the spiritual community now, is to just admit when you need to grow and when you need to change.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and just wanted to thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Sam. So good to hear from you. Let's see. We have our next person here on the podcast. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
It's Heather.
Hey, Heather. How's it going?
Just want to say, start off with saying I've been listening to your music, and I listened to the Good Gifts album.
Oh, awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you so much for listening. I hope they've been helpful and, filling your spirit.
So I kind of had this kind of a story kind of similar to yours. Obviously, I haven't been a pastor or anything like that, but I actually went to a church camp one time and made a friend named Bobby, and good guy, and he's we were good friends and we're close even after the fact.
Yeah.
Later on, I found out that he lived close to me, and we started hanging out.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I was around when I was 16, 17. There was a stage of me that I don't want to look back on ever again. I found out that he was gay, and I cut off all ties.
Wow.
And I felt so bad.